This is the Christian Circle podcast, and you're listening to Pamela Fernandez, where we have conversations about Christian living. Here's the show. Welcome to a new episode of the Christian Circle podcast. Today we have a new guest, Dr. Celia Deane-Drummond, and she's going to talk to us about Catholics in the environment beyond Laudato Si. So, Celia, tell us a little bit about yourself and your ministry.
Yes, well, I'm an academic primarily, but I've also worked in education contexts. But I started off as a scientist, a research scientist, interested in plant physiology, which is the way the plants work, was specializing in sort of agrobotany and also nitrogen nutrition of plants. But along the way, I became concerned about some of the ethical issues around GMOs and that kind of thing, and I switched to a study of theology and ethics, and I've been more or less half my life in one and now the other half of my life in the other. So I try and look at the intersection between theology and ethics and biological issues of different kinds, including ecology, evolution, animals, and so on. So it's sort of occupied my working life, really, to work in both fields. So I have a doctorate in 2 different subjects and 2 degrees and so on. So I've been very concerned to try and think both as a scientist but also as a theologian and an ethicist.
Can you briefly tell people who don't know what is the document of Laudato Si and what are the insights into it?
Okay, yes. Well, I'm the director of the Laudato Si Research Institute that was formed in 2019, and it was named after an encyclical that was published in 2015 by Pope Francis. And that document has been hugely significant in, putting the idea of creation care and also the theological importance of acting on behalf of creation and on behalf of the most impoverished in the world, who are the ones that suffer the most in terms of carbon footprint. That document was very significant, and it also was released just in time for one of the Conference of Parties meetings on climate change in Paris in 2015. So it was strategically timed. Since then, Laudato Si, there was an update of it in Laudato Deum when Pope Francis, that was in 2023, the year before, 2 years before he, or about a year and a half before he passed away himself. But I think that Laudato Si stresses the sort of biblical and the theological ground on which Catholics and other Christians can come together on care for our common home. So it's a wonderful document to meditate with, even to learn from, and the wisdom in it is enormous. So, and one of the things that he talks about in Laudato Si is how it's not an optional extra for Christians to become concerned about the environment or about our ecologies. It's actually fundamental to the life of all Christians, really. And as I said, it's grounded both in an understanding of the value of creation, but also in our understanding of the Trinity and who Christ is, that we are all, if you like, interconnected and journeying together towards a common goal.
So now many Catholics today associate ecology with politics, and they are 2 very separate issues. How do we reclaim a sacramental understanding of creation that is rooted in tradition rather than just ideology?
I think this is a good question. But if you look at the sort of biblical account, really, which is on what Catholic tradition is rooted in, the material world is good, and that's talked about in the book of Genesis. But it's also made holy by the incarnation of Christ. Christ comes into the world, and actually this is God becoming incarnate in the material world. So it's a way of actually affirming that all of creation is almost in a sense part of who God is. And we give thanks as well in the Eucharist. That's what the Eucharist means. It means giving thanks. But it's also a common home. So we're all creatures of the one God, including other species. So we all share that sense of being creaturely and worshipping the Creator. And so our role, really, our vocation, if you like, on earth as Christians and as ones who understand that God is, in a sense, both within creation but somehow beyond it, is that we need to protect, the earth and its resources as the gifts of God to our world, but also the common good. So that sort of spiritual and sacramental understanding of creation can include politics in one sense, in that we work towards just structures in the social and the political realm as well as the individual realm. But the starting point is that we're all made in God's image and that all creatures are creatures of the one God. So I think that's the difference. We don't start with the political agenda or even necessarily the ecological agenda. We start from understanding that we live in a world in which we worship God, who is also the God as creator.
Yeah. And I think in your work you explored more of this, the theology of creation. We tend to, not focus so much on the matter of Genesis. Like we go through Genesis and we're going through the rest of the books of the Bible, but there's so much power in the Genesis of humanity, of all of God's creatures. And what are some ways, some meaningful ways that we can live out this theology?
Yes, I mean, I think that we need to see all of creation being precious and affirmed in God's sight. That we need to have if you like, take off our spectacles that looks at things as resources to be used and instrumentalized or transformed, but actually look at it the way God sees it, and so refuse to waste food and that kind of thing, because food is also life. It's given life by God, and so in a way we need to almost be apologetic at having to kill life in order to live ourselves. So, and in addition to that, we need to be aware and cognizant of where things come from. So try and use local products rather than ones that have been shipped in from Africa or other parts of the world where our particular wants are replacing the real needs of people living in the global south, for example. So we might want to grow our own vegetables, perhaps even on the windowsill if you're living in an apartment or something like that, and switch to green energy suppliers, ones which are using energy derived from green sources rather than ones which come from burning oil or carbon, ones that emit carbon footprint. Perhaps improve insulation in our homes if we do have that capacity, and perhaps possibly become active locally in trying to make a difference in the decisions that are made at different levels. And I would say, generally speaking, resist the culture of consumerism that's always being pressed in upon us by adverts, and then finally take a day off, a Sabbath day, and make sure that we do have time to rest and enjoy the world around us rather than sort of being on a treadmill and frenetically working from morn until night.
And you've written about the relationship between theology and evolution. So, how does understanding creation as a dynamic, evolving process change how we treat the earth practically? So, how does it affect how we view waste or even consumption or even farming for that matter? The matter of GMOs and all of these things require a lot of research. A lot of times, most people, they're mostly even unaware of what's going on with our farming issues. How does this affect how we view all these things?
I mean, I think that both evolution and ecology are connected by actually understanding the relationships between things, or interconnectedness. So, and I think that evolution, or understanding evolution, helps us understand what you might say is the history of ecologies through time. So we're not just looking at our ecology today. We're looking at it sort of historically.
Mhm.
And so I think it gives us hope that some recovery is possible once you see how resilient some species are. But also we need to recognize that we become agents of evolution ourselves, that we, for good or ill. So we have that power actually to change the way the world evolves by the way we act and the way we change habitats and the way we interact with other creatures in the world. So, and in addition to that, we have co-evolved with other beings, other species, and so literally they are our brothers and sisters. We're related, if you like. So the other species have helped make us who we are. They've helped form us, and I think that is an amazing insight of evolution, that we're not just sort of somehow isolated from all these other creatures, that we are in a way part of them and they are part of us. So they're not extraneous to our histories or being. And so then, and also much more recently, evolutionary theory has stressed that we're not simply controlled by our genes, which of course has come into the public imagination quite strongly, that somehow we think that we are just somehow genetically controlled, but actually the environment is in which creatures live, including ourselves, is absolutely crucial to the way what we are going to become. So, and I think farming practices need to recognize the way different species relate to each other over time. So we have to press to try and avoid the sort of monocultures and monochrome way of industrial farming of all kinds, and resist those practices that somehow diminish the biodiversity in which we're all situated. So I think we have to sort of, you know, really value and affirm that variety within creation, that we have a tendency to reduce it to things which we think we need, when actually in the process then we open up all kinds of other problems that then need to be solved. So I think we sort of have to get back to regenerative forms of agriculture and other ways of farming locally and so on, that actually respect the world and the life in which we live, and the lives of other creatures.
So many people right now might feel overwhelmed, by all the environmental issues. We see this all the time in the news. You hear it on the radio. What are some, at least three practical practices that are rooted in Catholic spirituality that someone can begin today just to care for our common home, without being too overtly scrupulous or burning out?
Yes, I think that that sense of being overwhelmed is a common feeling, in that we might start getting what some people call eco-anxiety of
Mhm.
different kinds. But my sense is that actually contemplating the beauty in the natural world and actually spending time in it will help us sort of escape from our own inward-looking concerns and try and actually be part of the creation in which we live. So actually finding any kind of living being to spend time with. When I teach courses in ecology to my students, one thing that's incredibly transformative is to put their cell phones or other technological devices away just for a day and just sit with a tree and go there the same day every week and spend time with it. And it's amazing what happens just by those simple actions of contemplation. But I think that in addition to that, that sort of sense then of growing love, if you like, of the natural world will then inspire us to behave differently, as well as practice of contemplation, and prayerfully celebrating the diversity in the natural world as much as we can still find it. It then would lead us to say, well, let's live more simply and become, if you like, more like the other creatures that are in a way much more receptive than maybe we've become. We've become far too acquisitive and always wanting more and more. And I think we need to try and, like I say, go back to living a bit more simply, growing our own food, distinguishing, importantly, real needs and wants. So not sort of being convinced by the consumerism mentality that tends to require us to buy things that we don't really need. Or luxuries and things that aren't really necessary. So trying to distinguish those, as well as growing our own where we can, and so on. So, and then the third area, as well as live simply and contemplation, would be watching our carbon footprint in travel and using green transport that's on our feet, or potentially cycling or some other way of traveling which is at least less carbon intensive of the train, for example, or anything really where we make a conscious effort not to, if you like, generate even more carbon footprint.
Mm. So how does the Eucharist shape our relationship with the natural world? Like, how can living a Eucharistic life influence how we shop, how we eat, how we waste, how we live in the environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Eucharist, certainly in the Catholic tradition, is more than simply a common meal.
Mm.
It's an encounter with a living Christ who became united with the earth in order to save it. So it goes back to this idea of incarnation, that and Christ has sort of left us something tangible and physical behind, through which we can remember him and remember what he did, but also what he's still doing in a way. So it's like uh, making present what happened historically 2000 years ago, that Christ came, that Christ died, and Christ rose again. So the bread and wine are somehow are transformed wheat and grapes, but they become, if you like, Christ to us. So I think also knowing that that bread and wine are transformed by human activity, it means that some kind of human intervention is allowable, but it's through those created gifts that we enter God's real presence. So when we're meditating on that amazing presence of Christ in the Eucharist, it means that when we think about creation more generally, then it becomes a real gift and source of life for us. So creation and Christ are not then separated, it's all one and the same. So creation is somehow in Christ. So then it means that it's not an optional extra then for any Christians and Catholics in particular to think about the created world as some sort of marginal concern, but actually it's absolutely central at the heart of what we believe. So in our shopping, for example, we need to respect the created world to minimize waste, to reduce our meat consumption even, and just think more carefully about what we're doing and what that then signifies in our relationship with the natural world.
You've emphasized the role of virtue in ecological living. Which virtue do you think is the most lacking right now in how we treat creation, and how can we cultivate that in daily life?
Yeah, I mean, I've thought a little bit about this question over a number of years, and I've come to the conclusion that the one virtue that we need is wisdom, because wisdom is both virtue as such, but it's also practical. So it has a relationship with the divine, because Jesus says the wisdom of God, but also you can think of the Holy Spirit or even God the Father as somehow bearing wisdom. So and that sort of shows us in a way how to act through practical wisdom. So if wisdom as virtue builds our relationship with God, the practical wisdom helps us to make good choices that are right and good for the community and in line with what God intends for the future of creation and not just ourselves. So I think wisdom sees the whole picture, so it's not just about information. So sometimes we think that the one thing that we need is to get more knowledge, but actually it's not that. We need wisdom. So, and I think it grows from experience. Some, of course, young people can be very wise early on, as it were, but sometimes it comes from decision making over time and being open-minded and learning from others. So when Thomas Aquinas talked about practical wisdom, he talked about something called memoria or memory. So recalling what has happened in the past and learning the lessons from the past, so not making the same mistakes again and again, but also about foresight or thinking about the future. And if we sort of hold those two in balance, the memory and the thinking about the future, then we have insight about what to do in the present. So I think that, and that's cultivated too by learning and listening to others and seeking the common good. So I think that we grow in wisdom together. We can never be wise purely as individuals, and I think that's one lesson that Laudato Si and other documents stress, is that we are a community. We're about our common home. We're about the common good. We're about developing what he called an integral ecology. That's a holistic approach to the way we act in the world, joining up our education and the way we treat others, as well as the way we treat the earth. So it's not one or the other. Ecology can't be separated from issues of deprivation and poverty. They're all joined up together, and I think wisdom helps us to do that. So the ecological living is also about being conscious of other people, as well as directly the natural world around us.
So now if a parish wanted to deepen its ecological spirituality just beyond just recycling bins and solar panels, what would you suggest they do, either through liturgy or through catechesis or community?
Well, very fortunately, just this year, a new votive mass, that is an optional mass for the Creation Day, September the 1st, was released by the Dicastery for Divine Worship, and any Catholic Church can access that. It was released in July this year and has been celebrated by Pope Leo XIV in his papal summer house already, for the first time. So I think that's one. There is now a special mass that enables people to celebrate that Creation Day, which is September the 1st. But there is a season of creation as well, which runs from September the 1st through till October the 4th. And there are all kinds of resources available on the web to enable people to gain prayers and other readings that are appropriate for that season. And I think catechetically, it's important to include creation care and Laudato Si in the education of our children, and also in in catechesis, and when people are joining the church. In addition, it would be wonderful if more than once in a blue moon, as we say here, that creation care comes into a homily. So I think that the insights of Laudato Si are not really absorbed or recognized by those who are leading very often. And I think we need to at least talk to our parish priests about potentially doing that, and having maybe grassroots initiatives as well, so that it's cemented in the way we act. And those grassroots initiatives don't have to be done in isolation. If there's a will, at least we can join with other churches ecumenically on shared projects, or even other religions. So it's a way of actually making peace, So the theme for this year, for the season of creation, is peace with creation, but it also encourages peace with one another. And everybody knows that there is this huge need for peace as the climate starts to warm up even more, as there are more and more environmental refugees flooding into different places. We need to find ways to make peace with one another, and actually joining together in a shared task like that is just the sort of early and first steps for doing that.
So is there any last bits of advice or something that you really want to highlight and tell people?
I think start small. If all this sounds a little bit too much to begin, and I think there's always something that we can do, even if it's the basic steps of recycling or some of those other things which seem a bit sort of extraneous, but they're the beginning of putting into practice what we believe. But everybody is on a conversion journey. Pope Francis talks about the need for ecological conversion, and I think even those of us who've been in this area for 30 years or more, we're still on that journey together. So I think that I would just stress, there's no need to feel we can do nothing. We're not powerless. We can do something. Ideally, with others, but there's also things that we can do as individuals, and so that we can make a difference.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast, and I'm really glad that you were able to come and talk to us about this subject. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.